Create and execute Windows command files, command function walkthrough. This video is a code walkthrough for the get command input function. Code described in previous videos will be pointed out, and new code will be described in detail. How to copy the function and test driver code from my web page was described in the previous video, string input function. You are watching a Tom's Tech Notes video. If you like this video, please wait until you are finished watching it, then click my name, Thomas Wallace, to visit my channel page. A welcome video will play to describe my other videos. The driver for get command has already been discussed. The changes in the using video are all in this routine, just additional coding to process the return command name. Before we begin the walkthrough, here are some notes. I have included all of the functions needed to run the code described in the walkthrough, and that is function getString.bat, the command list, the data file, command list.txt, and the function itself, get_command.bat, and finally the test function, get_command.bat. They've all got to be in the same folder or on the desktop before executing the test get_command.bat. All the code required to execute this function is given in the website page. The driver testcommand.cmd.bat has been described briefly, and the function itself, get_command.bat, will be described in detail. Some cleanup to the comments have been done since the last video about this function, but the code has not been changed. And we already described that a parameter was added to the getString function described in video string input function. And we did describe that in the video command input function. The test function loops, calling get command for each command list entered by the user. The command list name is passed as parameter 1, and the command entered by the user is returned as parameter 2 from the call to get command. The test driver calls function get command with two parameters. The first parameter is an input parameter to this function, and it has the command list requested by the user or tester to be displayed. The second parameter is an output parameter from this function, and it will display the command selected from the list displayed within this function. It will return the value none if none is selected. First of all, it's important to remember that the data file has codes at the beginning of each record to tell the program which type of record it is, and we'll describe those when we go through the sets here. The command list is parameter 1. It's retrieved here. We set a variable fname to be the name of the data file. I didn't pass it in as a parameter, I just set it in the get command function. You could certainly change that if you wanted to change the code around and pass that in as a parameter. The default answer is the value to be returned by this function if the program couldn't locate the requested command list in the data file. The codes for the records are 1 to define the header records, 2 for the preamble records that describe the command list, and code 3 for the command records themselves that list the commands and the descriptions of the commands. The prompt character is defaulted to the greater than symbol, and you have to use the escape greater than when you input the prompt character this way. Prompt is set to nothing, but it will be set if the search for the command list is successful. It will be set from the data file, and we'll see that when we come to it. Okay, this function get command starts by calling get command list. It's going to look up the requested command list in the data file. Here are the parameters to command list. This is the name of the command list to be located in the data file. Fname is the name of the file to be read. That's the text data file. Cname is the name of the command list just found, or it's the default code for not found, that bad list name. Def ands just passes in the bad list name string, so it can be returned if the search is unsuccessful. Prompt will be, if the search is successful, prompt will be defined in the data file for the command list, and that prompt string will be returned here. Record count 1 will return the record number of the header record for a successful search, the header of the command list that we requested. This parameter, defAnts1, the last parameter, will be the default parameter from the header record for the command list. That will be the command to be assumed if the caller doesn't specify a command name from the prompt and he just hits return. This is the return value that will be used in the prompting that will occur a little bit later in this program. So this is the return value from the header, and we did describe the contents of the data file in a previous video. Some debug print. There's lots of debug print through this function, so if you wanted to simply take it out, you could. I would recommend you leave it in case you have problems with the code and you want to make some changes to it. Just all you have to do is uncomment the echoes, stick in some pauses for debugging. That's the simplest way to debug batch coding. Retry is the loop in get command. What it'll do, once it finds a command list that you requested, it'll prompt you with a list of commands in that list, and it will keep prompting you as long as you haven't entered a valid command in that list. That's what this loop does. This program returns to the caller two ways. It was unable to find the command list the caller requested, or the caller entered a valid command from the command list. It would return that value. So it stays in this loop as long as he's entering a command that is not in the list. First of all, it says, did get command list find the command list we wanted? If it didn't, these would be the same. CNAME would have been set to the default, which is bad list name. If these two are not equal, that means the search was successful and we need to process the command list we located. This copies the returned record number of the header record into a working variable and calls show commands to display the list of commands from the command list. It passes two function show commands, which is an internal function. It passes the record count of the header record and the default function to be returned if the caller doesn't just presses return when prompted to enter a command. This is the default command. CList is the output parameter from the show commands function. It will contain a list of the valid commands for this command list separated by spaces. And we need that list to call the getString function because we're going to pass it that list so the getString can determine if we entered a valid command name. After we've done show commands and it has listed the commands for the command list, we call getString to prompt and let the user specify one of the commands in that list. And we pass it the prompt, which we got from the header record for the command list. We've described all the parameters before to getString. Default answer, remember, we read from the header record. And command list, again, is the list of acceptable commands. The no says don't show this list of acceptable commands because we've already shown the list of commands from the function show commands. That's already shown the list of commands. We don't want to show it again, which would happen if we put a yes here. This is that extra parameter we added for this get command function to getString so that we can tell getString whether or not to return on an illegal string entry. Remember, the way getString was originally set up, it didn't return until a valid entry or the default was entered. Now we need it to return on an illegal entry because we need to reprompt by calling show commands again, because it's the one that does the prompting here, lists the commands. So we added that parameter, and we did describe that before. And we set it to a yes in the call because the default is no in getString. So it will return if the caller enters a command that's not in the list. It'll return after an error message, and then we'll call show commands to show the list again and reprompt. Then here's the test for whether or not we entered illegal. Remember, the new code for this parameter returns a value illegal if you entered a value that didn't match one of the choices in CList. If you do return an illegal value, here's your error message, echo illegal command entered, try again. This is the way you have to have an exclamation point. You have to have 2 escape characters in front of the exclamation point for this line to display the way you want, which is to have the exclamation point right after try again. And then you go to retry, which is the one that loops, calls show commands again to display the list again and prompt the user for another entry. Now we process at the bottom here. Remember, this test said whether we entered a valid, whether we were able to find the command list. And now we processed that. And when we get out of this branch there, that means we did have a valid command list, and the caller either specified, or the user either specified a valid command or specified he wanted the default. So that's the 2 ways to get out of this if statement. If it falls out of this block, meaning we did have a valid command list and the user did enter a valid entry or a valid default, it sets the output value to return to the caller of getCommand into a variable pout, and then it'll come down and exit, and it will set the second parameter in the call to getCommand as that output command that was entered by the user. And remember, we have discussed this before. If you're exiting from a function that has delayed expansion in effect, you have to use this format to return values. You have to say an end local. You have to start a block, say end local, and the block ends here. And you have to set the value here inside the block. The second parameter is our output parameter. And then we terminate the function and return to the caller of getCommand, which is our test function to call getCommand. Let's look at what the internal routines do that we called. We called getCommand list. I can display all the lines except the title. This is the internal function getCommand list. Here are the parameters to getCommand list. I believe we did describe those before. Name of the command list that we're looking for in the data file. The data file name. This is an output parameter. Here's another input parameter, value to return if command list not found. And now the output parameters. If you found the command list, you'll return it here. If you didn't find it, you'll return that default value here that says you didn't find it. For a successful search, after you found the command list, it will return the prompt string that's in the data file for this command list. And it will return the record number of the header record that it found in the data file. And lastly, it will return the default command from the header record of the located command list that will be returned if the user or caller presses return when prompted for his input. This is the command that would be returned, the default command. Sets the record count to 0 for the read loop. This statement reads 4 tokens from the data file. The data file was parameter 2, remember. It reads 4 tokens from each line in the data file. They're delimited by commas. And remember how this works. %% will contain the first token, and then JKL for the next 3 tokens. We're reading 4 tokens from the data file. We're starting the search for the command list that we want. So we start the record count at 0, we increment it by 1. So now we're looking at the first record in the data file. We save the name, which is the second token. The first token, remember, is the identifier that says I'm a header record. The second token will be the name of the command list. So it says if we're sitting on a header record, if %1, that's where we read that first token, if that's a header, now we're going to see if that header matches the one we're looking for. And again, we saved name1 here from the second token of that record already. So now we just look at, is that saved name the same as the name we're looking for? Remember that that was the first parameter and we copied it into variable name here. So we're saying, is the name from the record the same as the name we're looking for? If it is, there's an old comment that says we found it, and we did. So if it does match, we return these. We're going to use these as for outputs. We're going to return the name of the command list that we found, as opposed to the name we would return if we couldn't find it, which is bad command list. So we're going to return the name that we found, and we're going to return the record number, and we're going to return the default value in parameter 7. That's in the header record. And we're going to return the prompt from that header record. So remember, there's the first one was the identifier, but J, K, and L are the name of the command list, just as a confirmation that we're on the right one. K is the prompt to be used to prompt the user for input, and L is the default command to be used if the user just hits return when he's prompted for input. And then we're done. Now, if it didn't match the header, if we're on a header record but it didn't match the one we're looking for, we're going to keep looking, and that means we're going to loop back here to the read again and read the next record. And we'll continue to do that as long as there are records and we haven't found a match. And remember, if we found a match, we've already processed it. But if not, we read down until we see another header, and we see if does that header match the one we're looking for. If not, we read the next one. And we keep doing that until we either find a matching header or we run off the end of the file. And then when we ran off the end of the file and we didn't find it, we set that character, that special string that says bad list name or bad command name, whatever it was, we set that as the output name to tell the caller that we couldn't find it. These are the errors, remember. Then we set prompt to prompt not found. We're not going to use that prompt. And we set the record count to 0. But the key is we returned a special value here to tell the caller we couldn't find it. So we're finished. We've set up our parameters that we need. Remember, these are the output parameters. As long as we've set all the output parameters, we're fine. So we're going to set 3 to this value, either the correct command list name that we were looking for or the code that says we couldn't find it. We're going to set the 5th parameter, output parameter, to prompt, the prompt string we read from the header of the one we located. And we're going to set the 6th parameter to the record number where that header record is, because we're going to read from there on and list the commands later. And we set the 7th parameter to the default command that we read from the header record. Some of these aren't being set, but we're not going to need them. We're not going to use them since if we didn't find a matching record. So that now get command list returns to the caller. And now let's see what the show command does. Remember, show command is going to get called shortly thereafter after we found the command list. So we go to show commands. We pass show commands these parameters. The list of commands for this command list is an output parameter. We're going to output the list of commands as we process them for checking when we prompt that the user enters a valid entry. An input parameter is the record number of the header record. That tells us where to start listing the command records. And the default command tells us what to return in case the user presses return when he's prompted for an input. So what we do is we start out by skipping. And I want to point out that the skip command does not work with delayed expansion. If you use exclamation points here, the format, it doesn't work. You get a syntax error. So you have to use ordinary expansion. So just make sure you don't need delayed expansion here. So it's going to read 3 tokens because we only need to read 3 for the command records. It skips down to 1 past the header record. It skips through the header record. So now it's sitting on either a preamble record or a command record. If it's now sitting on a header, that means we're done. That might mean that there weren't any commands for that command list. So if it's a header record, we're done with the one we were trying to list. If it's a command record, we're going to increment the count of the number of commands in this command list, and we're going to check whether or not the command in the record is the default command. Remember, we passed that in as a parameter. If it's the default command, we're going to show the command, the description of the command, and the word default on the line. If it's not a default command, we're just going to show the command and the description. And as we do that, processing the command records, we build a list of the valid commands separated by 1 space. And we're going to use that in the prompt later to verify whether or not the user entered a command from the list. So if it wasn't a command code, and it wasn't a header, and it wasn't a command code, it's probably a preamble. So check that it's a preamble, and if it is, just echo the second token from the record, which is where the preamble text is. That's an introductory text to describe what the commands are going to do. That's going to display in each prompt set of commands that gets displayed. So we do that. So once we finish processing the whole file, we've processed it down to the next header. That's what we've done. Then we're done, and we're going to return that command list that we built. Remember, that's the list of the valid commands for this command list. So then we return it, and there's more debugging code. Remember, I have a lot of debugging code in here that you could activate if you wanted. So then it returns to the caller, and now we're going to be ready to do the prompt. So let's go back to the routine. Here's get command. Remember, we've found the command by using the function getCommandList. We displayed the list of commands with the show commands function that we just described. Now we're ready to call getString to actually prompt the user for an input. Remember, we've just displayed the list of commands, so we don't do it again. That's why there's a no here. Don't show the list that's here. This is a list of valid inputs. Don't show it, and return if he enters a bad one. If he enters a command that's not in this list, return, because we're going to reprompt here. That's why we made that change to getString. We added that parameter. So now we say, is it illegal? Fine. Then we go back and reprompt. Let him try again. If he finally enters a correct value, set it into this variable and then output it here as parameter 2 of the get command function. It returns the output, the user entered command name as parameter 2. And then it's up to the test driver to figure out what to do with it. We returned a special code if there was an error here that we couldn't find the command list. So if the return value isn't that special code, that means it is a valid command for that command list. And we'll elaborate on that in the using video on using the command function, and there I'll show you how to actually program your code to make efficient use of the return command from the user. That's the end of this video. Be sure to look at the one on using the command input function, because that again shows how to actually use that in reasonable code in a program. Thanks for watching my video. If you like this video, please click my name, Thomas Wallace, to visit my channel page to watch my other videos.